disciples, and welcome to another episode of Imagine with Me, an opportunity I have to meet and hear from so many innovative leaders across the life of our church. And today's conversation, I'm joined by my good friend, Brad Lyons, who is the president and publisher of Chalice Press, also known as the Christian Board of Publication. So I'm so glad that Brad is joining us live from St. Louis. Thanks for being with us, Brad.
Hi, Terry. It's good to be here.
Good to have you, sir. And thanks for making time to join us. And hopefully the residual effects of your sabbatical, which ended not too long ago, are still with you and fueling you further toward the end of the year. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Brad. You know, we know Chalice Press. We don't always know the people behind the work. And so tell us a little bit about your ministry, and how you even came to this work.
Sure. I'll go all the way back to the beginning. I was a member of a new church, United Methodist Start, in Edmond, Oklahoma, a suburb of Oklahoma City. So I grew up in a United Methodist church that I really think didn't know it was a disciples church. I've always had that ecumenical ethos around me. I went to the University of Missouri and majored in journalism because I wanted to be a storyteller. And the best way to do that in the early 1990s was journalism. A lot has changed on that front. That's a different subject. So I had a few years as a newspaper journalist. Then this thing called the internet came along, and I started working on that. And eventually I moved to St. Louis, went to a disciples congregation, and one day was handed a job notice to become the communications director and a program officer at what was then the Division of Higher Education, which is now Higher Education Leadership Ministries. And I thought, oh, this sounds really cool. I'd love to go work with college students and on campuses, and I'll do this over a couple of years, and I'll jump over to one of these schools, and that'll be great. Well, 11 years later, after I realized how much fun it was to work with college students and seminarians and the academic community, I was invited to apply for the open position of president and publisher at the Christian Board of Publication. And I laughed at the time because I thought, I'm 39. I have no real publication experience, like the nuts and bolts of creating things or all that kind of stuff. But I figured, yeah, it's a good opportunity to get out there and interview. And lo and behold, they offered me the job. And lo and behold, I took it. So I started working here at Chalice Press in August of 2011. It is now 2022. Time flies when you're having fun. So that's how I have ended up here. I've lived in St. Louis for almost 25 years. I'm a dad. I've got a 23-year-old who works at a medical clinic that serves the St. Louis LGBTQIA community, and I'm so proud of that. I've got a sophomore at the University of Missouri who wants to be a kindergarten teacher, and I'm so proud of that. And I've got a 7th grader who is just awesome, and I'm so proud of that. I'm also married just about a year now as I have this conversation to Courtney Richards, who's the Communications and Development Director for Week of Compassion and the Disciples Disaster Response and Sustainable Development Ministry. So lots of joy all around. Through that church has brought me, and that has helped instill in my family a social justice mindset and a desire to serve others.
Amen. So glad for the joy in your home. And many of us know Courtney separate from you. And so it's nice to know that, you know, we all have our own. You can't have a whole unless you got two healthy wholes coming together. So we're grateful for that, and grateful for the joy you always express about your kids. So that's awesome. And you've just passed, as you said, 11 years as a president and publisher of Chalice. So what kind of changes have you seen during that time? We all know publishing, let alone Christian publishing, has been through some transitions recently. Yeah. So talk about what's been going on and how Chalice has fared during that. And then I'm going to ask you to talk about some of the changes, but let's maybe talk a little bit about what's been going on during the time of your presidency.
Sure. About the time I came on board, the Christmas before, my mom gave me a Kindle, which, you know, we all remember. Well, those of us who do ebooks remember our first Kindle. And that was right around that time. And that was really transforming the book industry. And there was all sorts of speculation over what ebooks would look like and how rampant they would become. Borders had just closed. moment
Yeah.
of silence for Borders. I loved
Well,
Borders.
yeah, exactly.
And so there was a real big question mark about what does publishing look like in this ebook world. That has kind of stabilized of late. um, and so that's an industry that, at least in the Christian publishing side, has fairly stabilized. Um, Beyond that, the pandemic really did force a lot of us to go back to our bookshelves, right? We
Mhm.
probably read more in 2020 and 2021 than we had in the previous 8 years because we were stuck at home. And so we, the way the book industry works, we saw a huge amount of returns at the beginning of the pandemic as the big booksellers were trying to unload inventory, and that hurt us. We managed to regain our footing though, and I don't like the reason why, but it speaks to our ministry. Um, when George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, we had more than a dozen books ready to go about racial justice, racial reconciliation, anti-racism. And we saw a big surge in those during the summer of 2020. And we got some great national recognition for that. And that's
Mhm.
I will hang my hat on that any single day.
Absolutely.
Um, and so we were in the right place at the right time, and other publishers were playing catch up on that trend. And so I like to think that we were, at least, we saw that one coming. And we continue to adapt to a changing marketplace. The way that the economy continues to ebb and flow right now, and we're not quite sure what it means. We're probably, we say the words consumer confidence a little too much at Chalice because we're worried about where it's going.
Mhm.
But we watch the economy and see how that's all playing out. So in terms of what we've done at Chalice, we have really ramped up our social justice efforts, particularly on anti-racism. We've also worked in LGBTQ. We've also worked in class and economics. We've also added some additional offerings for families. And so we dumb lucked our way into having a book on do-it-yourself Christmas activities in 2020. That was a pretty good Christmas present. So we continue to expand and want to speak to the church that is open and affirming of LGBTQ. And that's kind of the big pressure point in Christian publishing. That's where you're making your divisions and your choices. And we are firmly on the supportive side of that. We're one of the two general ministries that is open and affirming. And I'm quite glad to be a part of that. Those are kind of highlights of what I'd
Yeah.
say in terms of how the publishing industry has evolved
Yeah.
over 11 years.
I know that I've been so proud of the national recognition that you got, even mentions in Publishers Weekly and other
Mm-hmm.
important trade journals about just the offerings that we already had, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these are
Right.
things that we already had in our stable, not things that we rushed to try to get somebody to write a book on
Right.
anti-racism. And
Right.
as you said, that speaks to where the ministry has always been,
Right.
or at least been under your leadership. So just grateful for that, and very proud to be able in other spaces to name the offerings that Chalice has had. But Chalice has recently made some pretty big changes.
We
And
have.
tell us a little bit about Chalice Media Group and what's happening there.
So those of you who go to General Assembly know that when we give our report, it's the Christian Board of Publication. That was the name we were founded with in 1911. That is what we are still legally known as today, but we're pretty much known by Chalice Press by most folks. But that still kind of puts us into a cubby hole of being a print manufacturer. And we recognize there's more than one way to tell stories. And so Chalice Media Group has been rolled out this past summer, and it is an acknowledgement that we're going to be telling stories in different ways. Chalice Press has been nonfiction, just strictly nonfiction, but we have recently taken on fiction because we know that we follow a man who told stories, right? We think about the parables, and we can think that Jesus crafted these stories, whether he saw them as he was walking the roads between villages, or he was just a great storyteller. We know that fiction is a way that we can tell stories too. So we have added fiction to our line. We're being very, very careful about how we're doing that right now, very intentional. We're going to start with 2 fiction books that are going to be available early next year, in the spring, I think March and April, roughly. I'd have to double check that, but in the spring when it warms up. in addition to continuing to do the nonfiction, social justice oriented work we have. But the fiction line will continue to carry those values of progressive Christianity, of inclusion, of acceptance, of understanding that life's not easy and we're in this together. And so that's where the fiction is working from. And as someone who wanted to tell stories as a kid who was doing fiction, it was a lot of fun. The other part of this is that we're branching out into podcasts. And so we know that so many of us consume material now just through our ears. And so we're going to be working to acquire podcasts that help continue to tell stories in different kinds of ways as well. I have nothing I can announce just yet, but we're working on it. So those are the two new frontiers for us. There are additional frontiers out there that we think we can explore in the coming years, but this is our starting point. This is where we think we can make the most progress in a short amount of time.
That's really exciting. I think one of the things that I hear a lot in terms of just whole Christian publishing is that, just as our world is polarized, just as the Christian church is polarized, conservative, progressive, however you want to call the ends of the spectrum, Christian publishing is very polarized. And I think Chalice is one of the few that falls more toward, there's a hunger for what you're talking about that's not always present.
Yeah.
What's your sense of how other publishers are or are not responding to the whole media? Are you early into this exploration? Are you sort of ahead of the curve, or is it just a move that we need to make and can make?
It's a little of all of those. I think we're kind of in the middle of where a lot of folks are and trying to make heads and tails of how we make progress on that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like I'm running into a lot of other publishers that are talking about their podcast. It's still a fairly small number, I would think. I think there is a recognition that content delivery has changed.
Yeah.
Certainly in the last 7-8 years, but definitely since the pandemic. Now that we all know our Netflix passwords, more than we know scripture in some cases, that helps us recognize how those stories are being told differently. Christian publishing is polarized, like you said, and if you walk into a bookstore like a Barnes and Noble or a Books a Million, most of what you're going to see is on the conservative and evangelical side, and that's hard, but that reflects who has bought those books over generations. And we're hoping that we can penetrate that market more effectively and provide an alternative voice out there. And part of that is that we've been working with sales representation that's going out to bookstores to say, there's another story that you all are needing to have on your bookshelves. And here's who's going to tell that for you. And so strategically, as we think about how we spread the Chalice message, that's a pretty key part for us, is to be telling bookstores, this is a key audience that you're missing.
Right. And not that the other audience is bad. We're not saying that. It's just
No.
different. And I think there is just as much a hunger for the kinds of materials that you're talking about as for the items that we already see. Even Christian bookstores, for heaven's sakes, are folding and going under. Family Life, Family Christian stores, some of these big ones are big chains across the country are no longer. So I'm excited about what you're talking about. We've been certainly imagining who we must be as a new church for a new world, and speak a little bit more about how you see Chalice in the future, and why do you think it's important for disciples to have a voice in this publishing media world? Why do you think it's, we had Disciples World and that closed, and why is it important that we still have a voice in this media world?
It's important because Chalice represents a denomination that has important things to say. I don't have to go very far to see where the disciples' mission of inclusion and acceptance is sorely needed in this world. I don't have to go very far because I work in an environment where that is not common. And that's really what gets me out of bed in the mornings. I think that disciples have a unique mission and a unique voice and a unique opportunity to be able to be bridge builders in the middle of all this. And I think we always have. And I think that's one of the things that disciples struggle with is how do we say that in a
Mm-hmm.
way that makes sense and resonates and sticks?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't envy you, Terri, because you're the one who has to figure out how to phrase all that. You're as the person with the highest profile in the denomination. We follow your lead on a lot of things. Yes, disciples do follow lead. We're notoriously independent, but I get in line behind you because I love the messages that you're bringing to the forefront all the time. We need to be sharing that word out in a more effective way. And
Mm-hmm.
part of that is that we get drowned out by the big money machines that can play the bookstore game well.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and part of it is just that we need to figure out how do we tell the world our story in a way that makes sense? How do we invite others to the table?
Mm-hmm. I think when we talk about that inclusion, it's really about just the core message that we say in our identity statement. As part of the one body of Christ, we welcome all to the Lord's table as God has welcomed us, and
Yeah.
having a priority to be a anti-racist church, having a priority
Mm-hmm.
to develop leaders and all the things. Let's be the church we say we are, and so we need
Right.
resources to do that. And I'm excited not only about the disciples' voices, but even some of the non-disciples' voices that Chalice has
Sure.
been able to bring to the table.
Right. A large number of our authors are actually from beyond the disciples,
Yeah,
and that's actually a selling point that we are not yoked to a denominational structure or oversight board or anything like that. We have the editorial independence, and that's appealing to folks who have come from those kinds of systems that are, imperialistic, for lack of a better word.
right. And we do have that. Well, we have that freedom in so many
Do.
parts of our church life. But I know what you're talking about in terms of those systems where they decide exactly. Well, the press serves only as an organ of the denominational
Right.
structure, and Christian Board of Publication has always been it's a separate entity and not governed by that. So
Mhm.
I'm hopeful, particularly as you're moving into other kinds of media, about all the places and the new voices that we'll hear, and the
Mhm.
opportunity that we'll all have to even in the ways in which these kinds of resources can come alongside our ministries
Sure.
and provide great resources. I think when you're talking about other kinds of media, there's just so much opportunity there. But
Right.
um,
Right. At the
finally,
same time, at the same time, we do want to continue serving the disciples. To be
oh,
clear about that, I
absolutely,
mean,
yeah,
let's get that up front.
absolutely,
We
absolutely,
we continue to produce resources for disciples, congregations, and leadership development, those kinds of
right,
things. And we also produce a camp curriculum that I'm hoping all of our disciples camps use. Inside Out is our
right,
line, and that helps us reach out into other denominations as well.
right,
Our products are intentionally ecumenical, and many are
right,
interfaith in that
right,
sense too.
yeah. And my sense is that even as we have resources that would speak both, it works on both sides, right? Resources that would speak to a broader ecumenical group that disciples could also leverage, and resources that we might develop that move
Right.
in the other direction. There's so much. There's such a hunger
There is.
for resources, like you say, for camp, for Christian education, for Sunday school. And so I hope that one of the things that we can do is with Chalice is figure out how we can use Chalice to update some of our denominational resources, because we have a real need to do
Yeah.
that, and we've got to figure out how to do that responsibly, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a complicated process,
Right.
but it's one that's on my radar, and I'm trying to figure out how do we do
Yeah,
it.
I understand. I understand, and it's just want to speak that people are crying out for those things as well.
Right.
So as we close, Brad, I ask everyone this question: as we think about imagining who God wants us to be as a church in a new world,
Mhm.
um, where do you think God is calling us, and what role do you think Chalice can play in that work?
Mm. I think God is calling us to be voices, active voices, celebratory voices for the diversity of God's creation, advocates for the planet we inhabit, advocates for the marginalized. Um, I think we are called to see the unseen and to right the wrongs as best we can, and to treat each other with compassion and grace. And I think Chalice can help bring that vision to our own little unique world of putting words together
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
to the disciples and beyond.
mm-hmm. That's so profound. I mean, I move through life. I have a little in the note app on my phone. I have a note that's just nothing but a long list of things that I need to read. And I'm sure, most of us, particularly if you're in clergy or people who are just curious about the world, right, are always thinking about what should I be reading next? Who should I be
Mm-hmm.
listening to and paying attention to? So,
Right.
so where can folks find out more information about what's coming in
Mm-hmm.
new releases, current releases? I'm sure Carol will put links, etc. But I'll let you have a final
Yeah.
word about what's coming up and where we can find some of these new things.
Thanks. As I say this, our website is chalicepress.com. But in the not too distant future, it will also be chalicemedia.com.org. I should have fact checked that one before. If you don't hit one, try the other. I think we have
Yeah.
them both. But Chalice Media is where you'll be finding the coming attractions, what's new, and those old resources like annual planning guide and Advent and Lent devotionals and all the disciples resources that you're looking for. And I will say that it supports our ministry when you purchase directly from us. Yeah, it helps to purchase from Amazon or Barnes and Noble or wherever. But when you purchase from us, because of the way that the publishing industry works, it's worth twice as much to us. I won't bore you with economics or mathematics, but I hope that those of you who want to support this ministry in our unique way will purchase directly from us, because it does make a huge difference.
Yeah.
And it supports the authors as well.
That's right. And that's an important thing to note. That's the way the system works, and we have to maximize it
That's right.
and optimize it for. So
Right.
be sure you go to chalicepress.com and look for Chalice Media for all your favorite authors. The new Advent devotional is out.
Mm-hmm.
So pay attention to that.
Lent
So
is coming in December. Yeah.
yeah, so we're so excited for all that's happening with Chalice Press and Chalice Media, Brad. Thank you so much for spending some of your time with me today to let the church know what's happening in the world of our own beloved Chalice Press and soon to be Chalice Media. I think we have a lot to be proud of. So thank you for your leadership and all that you're doing to shepherd this work.
It is my joy. With all of its challenges, it is my joy. Thank you.
Amen. Thanks so much, Brad.
Thank you.
Well, disciples, as Brad mentioned, it's that season. If you haven't already selected your congregational Advent devotional, go to chalicepress.com. Every year, there's an exciting devotional that's published. And we know that you're going to want to be paying attention to all the exciting things that are happening with Chalice Media Group, to see the podcasts that are coming forth, the new fiction that's being published, all in a opportunity or an attempt to really open up voices that speak to God's people in new and fresh and relevant ways. So thank you for the imagination, Brad, that Chalice is continuing to exhibit. I'm really excited for the future of our own press. So remember, there's always a new episode of Imagine with me coming, and I'm always excited to talk with you. You'll find links to these resources wherever you find this video. So thank you for joining me for yet another episode of Imagine with me. And remember that God loves you, and so do I. I'll see you next time. God bless.